بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. وأن عليا ولي الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سمع له لمن حمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سميع له لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم سميع له لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم إلهي عظم ذنب من عبدك فليحسن العفو من عندك يا كريم الله أكبر بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. الله. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وأن عليا حجة الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. سبحان الله والحمد لله. سبحان الله والحمد لله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
اللهم إني أسألك الراحة عند الموت والمغفرة بعد الموت والعافية عند الحساب.
الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. محمد. لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. اللهم صل على محمد.
ومحمد وآل محمد صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والمرسلات عرفا فالعاصفات عصفا والناشرات نشرا فالفارقات فرقا فالملقيات ذكرا عذرا أو نذرا إنما توعدون لواقع. فإذا النجوم طمست وإذا السماء فرجت وإذا الجبال نسفت وإذا الرسل أقتت لأي يوم أجلت ليوم الفصل. وما أدراك ما يوم الفصل. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. ألم نهلك الأولين ثم نتبعهم الآخرين كذلك نفعل بالمجرمين. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. ألم نخلقكم من ماء مهين فجعلناه في قرار مكين إلى قدر معلوم فقدرنا فنعم القادرون. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. ألم نجعل الأرض كفاتا أحياء وأمواتا وجعلنا فيها رواسي شامخات وأسقيناكم ماء فراتا. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. انطلقوا إلى ما كنتم به تكذبون. انطلقوا إلى ظل ذي 3 شعب لا ظليل ولا يغني من اللهب إنها ترمي بشرر كالقصر كأنه جمالة صفر. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. هذا يوم لا ينطقون ولا يؤذن لهم فيعتذرون. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. هذا يوم الفصل جمعناكم والأولين. فإن كان لكم كيد فكيدون. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. إن المتقين في ظلال وعيون وفواكه مما يشتهون. كلوا واشربوا هنيئا بما كنتم تعملون. إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. كلوا وتمتعوا قليلا إنكم مجرمون. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. وإذا قيل لهم اركعوا لا يركعون. ويل يومئذ للمكذبين. فبأي حديث بعده يؤمنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله، اشفعي لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا. يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيه يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وسي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله حاجات. يا سادتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أعمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وهاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله सल्लल्लाहु अलैहिम अजमाइन व लअनल्लाहु अअदाअल्लाह ज़ालिमिहिम मिनल अव्वलीन वल आखिरीन आमीन रब्बल आलमीन। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला
पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु कर रहा है मेरा दिल बयां करबला, इसने आशूर की शब का मंजर लिखा। सीने शाह पर बिनते शाहे हुदा और शबीर कहते थे ये बारहा, हमको जाना है कल करने वादा वफा। तुम पा जाएगा सब्र का मरहला, बात सारी सकीना ने शय की सुनी और जवाबन वो बस इतना कहती रही, अच्छा बाबा सुलाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। बोले शबीर ऐ मेरी नूरे नज़र, तुमको करना है अब शाम तक का सफ़र, तुमको कैदी बनाएंगे सब अहले शर। बोली शहजादी मुझको नहीं कोई डर, तुम कहो तुम सुलाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। शाह कहने लगे ऐ मेरी लाडली, तुम पाएगी अब शाम गम से भरी, आग दामन में होगी तुम्हारे लगी। बोली वो फिक्र मुझको नहीं है कोई, मेरा दामन बुझाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। मुस्तरब दिल से कहने लगे शाहिदी, तेरी किस्मत में बेटी सुकून अब नहीं, अब तमाचे लगाएगा शिमरे लई। सुन के ये बात कहने लगी वो हज़ीं, शिम्र से तुम बचाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। फिर कहा शह ने बेटी से कुछ यूं सुखन, फिर किया शह ने बेटी से कुछ यूं सुखन, सब हरम होंगे अब तो असीरे महन, तेरे हाथों में भी अब बंधेगी रसन। बोलिए बात सुन के वो तिश्ना दहन, तुम गले से लगाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। रो के शबीर ने उसके बोसे लिए, और रुखसार भी होंगे जख्मी तेरे, तेरे रोने के शहजादी दिन आ गए। बोली तुम कैसे देखोगे रोते हुए, हाँ मुझे चुप कराने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। बढ़ती जाती थी बेचैनी शबीर की, हर सितम वो उठाने पर राजी हुई। जिंदा बाबा न होंगे समझ ना सकी, सुन के सब मुश्किलें बस ये कहती रही। घर में रूठी मनाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। लिख के सलमान दिल फट रहा है मेरा, ज़ैन जब शाह वाला ने रोकर कहा, अब तो जिंदान मरकद बनेगा तेरा। बेटी साबिर की थी बोली वो साबिरा, मेरा लाशा उठाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। अच्छा बाबा सुलाने तो आओगे ना, रोज चेहरा दिखाने तो आओगे ना। पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
बर मोहम्मदिन व आले मोहम्मद सलावत। बड़े जुल्म राहों में सहती रही थी, यतीमी के ताने ये सहती रही थी। नहीं मार जालिम तमाचे से, न कर इसका दुश्वार जीना। बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। सफ़र में ये सोई न जिंदा में आकर,
उजाला किया है यहाँ दिल जरा कर। पदर से जो बिछड़े है आशूर को, सुकून पा सकी फिर कभी ना। बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। रसन दे गई है निशानी गले पर, है पेशानी जख्मी जो खाए थे पत्थर। निशान है तमाचों के रुखसार पर, मसाइब से जख्मी है सीना। बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। मिला दश्त में जब के बाबा का सर, लिपट के पदर से किया खूब घिरिया। वहाँ पहुँची ज़ैना तो शे ने कहा, सुला दो इसे जाके बहना। बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। कभी रोए जिंदा में तन्हाइयों पर, कभी बोली फूफी कि अब घर चलो। हुआ एक बरस एक महीना, बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। क़यामत की एक रात ऐसी भी आई, क़यामत की एक रात ऐसी भी आई। क़ज़ाने सकीना को लोरी सुनाई। कहाँ रो के सज्जाद ने ये फूफी के अब रोएगी फिर कभी ना। बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। जो कब्रे सकीना पे रोती थी कैदी, तो उन रोने वालों से बानो ये कहती, अभी थक के सोए जिंदान में, जगाना इसे अब कोई ना। बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना, अल्लाह बहुत रो चुकी है सकीना। बर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सलावत।
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sayyid Hasan, Rizvi, respected elders, dearest brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jamia wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumeen listed on the screen as well as all other marhumeen. Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha. Dua Shafai Mary's is requested for all those in need here and elsewhere, as well as those listed on the screen. Let us recite together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Ya Allah. Let us now invite Sayyid Hasan Rizvi to please come forward for tonight's Majalis. By Muhammad wa ali Muhammad Salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة بعد الصلوات. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We've been discussing what happened after Karbala, the movements that took the name of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and those who decided to take revenge. We've been discussing the movement of the Tawabin for the past few sessions. We talked about the first few individuals, who started it, how they started it, what was their background in history, what sort of mistakes did they make, how were they chosen. Then we talked a little bit about the background, their initial years of how they were meeting once a week, discussing strategy, discussing their goals, their aims, collecting money from the Shi'as, preparing arms, to be able to rise up against the army in Sham. We ended last time that in the year 683 CE, around the 14th of Rabi'ul Awwal, Yazid, la'natullah alayh, had died. And when this happened, this changed a lot of different factors. So we had mentioned that many of the Tawabin, the leaders there, were telling Sulaiman ibn Surad, right, the leader, that look, this is a sign, this is an omen from Allah. He's killed the biggest tyrant. Now we should go and start our inqilab now, start our uprising now. Sulaiman gave his reasons that, it's not a good idea. We should wait. In fact, this sign, because they were, the Tawabin had support, but it wasn't as widespread as they had liked it to be. He said, look, with Yazid now gone, and with the other factors, with the Umayyads fighting amongst themselves, with all these Shami clans fighting, said, okay, maybe this is a sign from Allah that rather we should go and get more Shias behind us. Like, let's get more support. They also tried to say, why don't we attack the Kufans, the people in Kufa who were responsible for the death of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Let's go after them before the people in Sham. He said, no, again, this is a mistake. Let's go after the people in Sham. This is what Sulaiman said as the leader. We'll go after the army in Sham. Then after that, we can come back and deal with Kufa if need be. And we gave his reasons in detail last time. Also, at this point, he had been sending out letters to different tribes, to two very famous tribes in the area of Madain and the area of Basra, saying that we are starting an uprising, join us and meet us. And they had received responses from both tribes saying yes to Sulaiman, that we are with you. You give the order and we will join you. So now over all this time, Sulaiman, the Tawabin have gained a lot of support among these Shias in various different areas. So again, we talked about in Sham how the successor to Yazid, who was his son, Muawiyah II, he only lasted about 6 months. He didn't even want Khilafah. He was an enemy of the Umayyads. Not to say that he was a Shia, but he knew that the Umayyads were, a corrupt regime. He hated his father and his grandfather. So he gave it up after 6 months. Marwan ibn Hakam is the next one. And he's dealing with a lot of difficulties too, because of all the issues among the Umayyad Empire then. We talked about how in Mecca, and now throughout the rest of the Islamic Empire, Abdullah ibn Zubayr sees his chance to rise up as well. So his empire, the Zubaydi Empire, is now expanding too. So when the representative of the Umayyads in Kufa is kicked out, they're replaced with a representative, somebody who's loyal to Abdullah ibn Zubayr. So now Iraq, many parts of Iraq, like Kufa, become pro-Zubaydi. And now with all of this, now again, we've moved on from the year 683 CE, now we're in 684. And 684, the next turning point for the movement is when Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, who up until this point was not involved in what was going on. He had been, back and forth. He had been in Kufa, right? Ibn Ziyad initially had put him in prison. Then after he had gotten out, he had left towards Mecca and Medina, and he had some things he was doing, which inshallah, when we finish with our discussion on the Tawabin, if Allah permits, we get the tawfiq, we have time, we'll go back and circle around and go more into detail about what Mukhtar was actually doing. Right now, we're only mentioning him tangentially because it's related to what happened to the Tawabin. So Mukhtar was out. Now, 684, Rabi' or Thani, around that time, this is when he ends up and re-enters Kufa. And when he re-enters Kufa, he's coming with a mission. He's saying that I am the one who should be leading the revolt and the Shi'as and taking out the enemies of Imam Hussein. So now, we've got two people who are vying for Shia power here. You've got the Tawabin, led by Sulaiman ibn Surat al-Khuza'i, and then Mukhtar comes walking in saying, no, I'm the one that you need to follow. So we want to discuss that tonight, inshallah. We're going to go through a speech or a letter that he was going around basically telling all the Shi'as, and we're going to also discuss why is it that Mukhtar did not feel the Tawabin, or specifically Sulaiman ibn Surat, why did he feel he wasn't qualified? And we'll discuss that inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So let's go first into his speech. So there's various things reported in the historical books. He came initially to Kufa, he met with his own sort of local supporters, and as usual, just assessed what's going on here. Same way, when you come to a new community, let's say you're traveling from here, you go anywhere else. When you go to another center, typically you ask, what's going on? What's the local, politics, things like that, right? That's what you usually ask. So Mukhtar wanted to know, what's the situation on the ground in Kufa? Right? Keeping in mind, this is somebody who's Ahl Kufa himself, but he's been away for a while. So he needs to know, what are the Shia activities right now? And then his supporters say, look, the Shias right now, all of them, the vast majority of them are all supporting the Tawabin movement led by Sulaiman ibn Surat. So when he hears this, he says, you know what, gather as many Shias as you can, I want to speak to them. So they gather him at one of these houses, and he begins to speak to the Shias, right? Mukhtar does. He says this. And they say that he also sent this in a form of a letter to other Shias and even to Sulaiman himself. So basically all of this stuff, same thing. So he says this, I have come to you from he who is in authority, the source of virtue, the representative of all of the representatives, and the one who is the Mahdi, the Imam, with an authority in which there is restoration of health, removal of covering, fighting against the enemies, and fulfillment of favors. Sulaiman ibn Surad, rahmatullah alayhi, may Allah have mercy on him and us, is no more than a useless old man and a worn out thing. Remember, Sulaiman is like the head of Shias, like great scholar in Kufa. And Sulaiman's like, oh, this old Buddha, this old guy, like, leave him alone. He has no experience of affairs and no knowledge of warfare. He only wants to get you out, and he will himself get himself killed, and he'll get all of you killed. But I only act following an example which was given to me, and a command in which there was made clear to me the might of the one in authority over you, the killing of your enemies and the restoration of your spirits. Listen to what I say, and obey my command, and then rejoice and spread the good news, for I am the best leader for the achievement of everything you hope for. Jeez. This is pretty hardcore, right? So, in there, if you paid attention, he's basically saying, look, this guy Sulaiman is not qualified in the least bit. So I told you, right, we want to go through the reasons that he gave. And he said it very clearly. He said, look, number one, Sulaiman is some old, worn-out guy. Besides that, he has absolutely zero military and political experience. He has no idea how to run an army, right? War strategy. He knows none of that. In terms of politics and diplomacy, he doesn't know any of that either. Like, he doesn't know anything. Like, what is this guy doing leading a movement, right? This is Mukhtar's sort of arguments. Then his third sort of point, so one was old age, like this guy's senile, he doesn't know what he's doing. Second is, forget his age. He's not trained, he's not an expert in the things that you need to lead a movement and a revolution. And the third is this. He's saying that I have been appointed by the Imam, the Mahdi. Now, who is he talking about? Is he talking about Imam Zayn al-Abidin, alayhi salatu wassalam? Or is he talking about somebody else? Most of you who saw the series or know your history, he was not talking about Imam Sajjad. He was talking about the brother, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. He's talking about somebody else. Or, yeah, the brother of Imam Hussein. He's like, he's the Imam. And he described him as the Mahdi. And there's a lot to discuss over here, and I want to open up a few different points. But let me give you the conclusion of all this. After this speech, they say about 2,000 people among the Shias who were originally with the Tawabin, they switch over and they join Mukhtar. So now, you've got the split. You've got these people who are kind of vying for power. The vast majority still supported Sulaiman. They were with the Tawabin. But slowly you start to see a lot of people saying, look, this guy, yeah, he's right. He does have the military experience. Mukhtar was a known warrior. He's good in politics. He's got, connections. He knows how to network. He's been all around. He has all these people behind him. So they knew him from all these past battles. And people had a high respect for the Ahlul Bayt in general, but very specifically for Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. Now, again, we might be thinking, oh, who cares about Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, right? The Imam was Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. What does that matter? So I want to start with this point first. This goes to the reason why the vast majority of the Shias in the Tawabin didn't switch over. Why? They said number one. And this is Sulaiman himself, I'm not going to mention his speeches, but all of them shared this idea. They said number one, first of all, Mukhtar, you're talking about that you've got military expertise, you're a political expert, you're a diplomat, like that's wonderful. What we are doing has nothing to do with war. What we are doing has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with military tactics. What we are doing is an expression of tawbah. It's an expression of love. We are regretful, hence the name Tawabin, right? That's what this is. This is a religious issue. This is an issue of aqeedah. This is an issue of theology. This is an issue about our connection to Allah and the Ahlul Bayt. This has nothing to do with you and your power games and your politics and stuff like that. No. This is about us trying to, seek vengeance, trying to show about Abdullah al-Hussein that we have love for him and we're upset that we couldn't fight with him. That's all this is. So keep your dunyawi stuff out of it. Right? This was their response. The second was this. He said, Ibn Hanafiya is not our Imam. Now, here's the question. Did everybody actually recognize Imam Zayn al-Abidin as the apparent Imam? Now, here is where there's an important issue in theology. Right now for us, it's very simple, right? When we grow up, we get the whole list of the 14 Ma'sumin very simply, right? And then we're tested in madrasa, name everybody in order. Although from what I've heard, not every madrasa kid can name them all in order, but it's okay. So we all know this stuff. It's been given to us on a silver platter. But back then, I think we have this misconception of history. The Shias had no idea what was going on. It wasn't this clear cut for them. Nearly every single time, especially after this moment, the Shias were very confused about who's the next person. Because now, there's no precedent. There's nothing set up, right? Obviously, who do you start off with? It's very clear that the first is Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So for anybody who's Shia Ali, that's very clear, right? No disagreement there. Then after that, again, they're all very clear that, okay, the next following that is Imam Hasan alayhi salam. Okay. So there seems to be some idea. Not very clear, but some people are like, okay, so it's going to go to the eldest son. That's what some people had in their mind. So, okay, but then after him, then who does it go to? Imam Hussein alayhi salam. It's like, oh, okay. So it doesn't always have to go from father to son. It can even go to brothers now. So now, after Imam Hussein, now what's going to happen? So they've got two sunnahs to go back to. They have a transfer from first to second, which is father to son. And then they have transfer from second to third, which is older brother to younger brother. So the Shias there are like, hold on a sec, what do we do now? What do we follow? The ones who in their minds thought, no, father to son, for them, who was it? It was Imam Sajjad. Although even then, if you look in their letters, they were kind of unclear about it. Because, in the back of our minds too, a lot of us, we said we asked these questions. The Tawabin, in any of this stuff, while they're sitting there in their meetings and they're writing letters, did they have any contact with Imam Sajjad? Did they write to him, say, this is what we want to do? Do you give us permission? Did they send any representatives to him directly? Even here, historically, it's very unclear. But the vast majority of historians say there's zero evidence that they did this. It was basically just some reaction that they had. They said, we have no letters, no mention. Now, people who defend the Tawabin, they'll say, look, it's because they needed to protect wilaya. They needed to protect imamat. The same way that Allah had protected Imam Zayn al-Abidin by giving him a short-term illness in Karbala. The same way Allah's divine hand was also over Imam Sajjad when Shimr was ready to kill him, right, on Sham Ghariban. Again, Allah's protecting him through Bibi Zainab. The same way in the court of Ibn Ziyad. The same way he's about to get killed again, Bibi Zainab comes forward through the divine hand and is protected. All along the way, you see Allah is interfering, and Imam Sajjad's being protected. All along the way. So some had this in their mind that, look, Allah seems to be, if we're calling this the sunnah of Allah, He seems to be protecting and covering up the institution of imamat and wilayat. So some have this idea that that's what the Tawabin were doing too, and many other Shias. They didn't want to openly declare that Imam Sajjad was the Imam. If they did, then what was going to happen? The Umayyads would have gone after him. Because they were all waiting for it. Right? So they said, let's not connect with him at all. They have in their mind that, look, we're not going to contact him, but we know what he would want. We know he would want us to seek revenge on our behalf. Right? And of course, think about the mind of a Shia at that point too. You have the head faqih, the head mujtahid of that time, Sulaiman ibn Surad, a senior Kufan. Somebody, again, they knew who was with Imam Ali, Imam Hasan. Although, again, we talked about his sour history, but they still saw him as the most knowledgeable. So they said, look, he's the one who's telling us what to do. Why wouldn't we follow him? I said, okay. But that's one thing, right? That's one group. But then we go to the other side of the people who say, but sometimes imamat transfers from one brother to another brother. What if imamat, just like it went from Imam Hasan to Imam Hussein, what if it went from Imam Hussein to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya? And they had some precedents for it. I'm not going to go through all the details, but some things were left. Imam Hussein, before he left, right, Medina and Mecca, he put things in charge of, he gave it to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. They say there were certain possessions that he had. We always hear these things, the Quran and the sword and rings and certain things that somebody who represents Allah and wilayat, they will have in their possession, right? Like this book of Fatima and the book of Ali, all these things. So some say, look, this is what Muhammad ibn Hanafiya had. He had all these treasures and secrets. So for some of them, they're like, look, then he must be the Imam. So now, again, think about the Shias there in Kufa. They're not sure. Mukhtar comes all of a sudden and says, look, I've got permission from your Mahdi, from your Imam, who's Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. And people are thinking, look, our Imam's obviously going to write to us. He's going to mention things to us. So it's very clear why some of them would want to switch. Honestly speaking, in history, if we're talking about the transfer of Imamat, when did it happen? When did Imam Hussein mention Imam Sajjad as the Imam? When did it happen? In Karbala, right? Who was there? Who was the surviving members to tell any other Shias? The enemies, some of them heard that, and we have later in history people like Humayd ibn Muslim, who narrates the majority of things that we have right now. He was an enemy, right? He fought Imam Hussein, but he switched sides later on. Right? He came to the side of the Shias later on. Or he was a Shia who was a traitor and then switched back. Unfortunately, we had, and we still do have a lot of these. But this happened, and he had all this information with him. So some say that's where he was giving out information to people. But we don't really have strong evidence of that. So it's a very, very weird, ambiguous picture that we have of history right now. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, like we said, why the Tawabin? Why are they so reluctant? Number one, they're like, look, this is a religious thing that we're doing. It's an emotional expression of love and regret and remorse and tawbah. That's what we're doing. So this is from our deen. This is not, keep your dunya, your politics and military stuff out of it. We don't care about that. They've already made it clear. We are either going to take revenge for Imam Hussein, kill the Shamis, right, and anybody who was a part of the death of Imam Hussein and the Shias. Either we will succeed and give Khilafah back to the Ahlul Bayt, or we'll die trying. That was their clear motives, right? So they're not looking out for political victory necessarily. Mukhtar, on the other hand, says, no, we need to have a successful mission here. And number two, I'm appointed specifically. Who put you in charge? And again, some Shias were like, but Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, no, he's not the Shia. He's not the Imam. So again, there's this sort of disagreement. But you do see the vast majority did not switch over to Mukhtar's side. There's the other point here I do want to open up actually too, is the first argument, right? Is this idea of Mukhtar mentioning that Suleiman's not qualified because he doesn't know politics, he doesn't know warfare. He doesn't know this stuff. If you're going to go and fight on the battlefield, right, Suleiman, you should know how to arrange your soldiers properly. At this point, inshallah, when we actually mention the Tawabin and when they go out to battle, how terribly they lost, all this stuff will come back and we'll mention how Mukhtar was right. But let's take this and pause for a second. We mentioned how in these discussions, we want to bring it to contemporary times too, right? And there is an actual interesting point that we can reflect on. Right now, a lot of us hear from different speakers, from different ulama, this sort of disagreement or different approaches about how is Islam led? How do Islamic movements go forward? Who brings the ideas of how these movements should go forward? So some will say, look, a faqih, a mujtahid, an alim, a scholar, mulana, mullah, akhun, whatever you want to call them, somebody goes and studies in the hawza, what do they study? Again, this is one group. They'll say, look, they study some law, some legal stuff, fiqh. They know the Quran, okay. They maybe know some history, whatever we assume that they have studied in the hawza, which, correct or not, I'm going to leave that aside. I'm giving you public perception right now. If they study some stuff in the hawza, that's great. But when they come back over here, they don't know how to manage anything. There's no management class in the hawza, right? There's no class on economics in the hawza, right? There's no class on psychology, all these things. So they said, look, they can come and teach people about the Quran and Hadith and the Ahlul Bayt and do history, do all this stuff. But dunya stuff, let's leave it to the experts who are experts in that, right? So this is one idea. Then there's another idea. They say, look, who are the ulama representing? Al-ulama warathatul anbiya. Right? This is the famous hadith that they say is narrated from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If I'm not mistaken. If not, maybe another imam. So some ulama say, look, the idea that we have is no, the ulama are carrying on that torch of knowledge from the Ahlul Bayt. Now, we have to ask us, again, putting our own presumptions and assumptions aside for a second. What do we view the Ahlul Bayt as? Us as Shias. Do we view them as people who just, came to teach Quran and Hadith, just like, religious stuff? Okay, just pray and fast and that's it? Or do they come to teach matters about the dunya too? Was the Prophet also a military leader? Was he also a political leader? Was he also the head of, let's say, the economic finance department, whatever you want to call it? Was he also walking around the bazaar himself? Was Imam Ali doing all of these things? Was Imam Hasan doing all of these things? So clearly, if we know our history, yes, they were administering all of these things. Right? So This view says, look, the Ahlul Bayt, their leadership, their governorship was all-encompassing. Why? Because their knowledge is all-encompassing. So some will say, okay, now, using the riwayat and verses from the Quran, they'll say, okay, if the ulama are supposed to succeed the Ahlul Bayt in that, they're supposed to take this inheritance, this wirasat from them, they should be able to do this exact same thing. Now again, some call this wilayat al-faqih. I don't want to get into terminology right now, because that sometimes it comes in our heads and we start branding people, categorizing, pigeonholing. Forget all that. I just want to talk about the ideas, right? That's it. So this group, the second group is saying, look, all that knowledge, we have Islamic economics, don't we? Why is it that we prop up Shaheed Muhammad Baqir Sadr, rahmatullah alayhi, so much? Because of his work of iqtisadana, right? Islamic economic system. That even Sunnis, and sometimes even quietly Wahhabis, they don't like to name that, they're taking from Shias, but you know, he wrote this wonderful 2-volume work where he explains capitalism and then refutes it. He explains communism and then refutes it, and then explains the Islamic economic system. Okay. We have books by the ulama about, for example, Islamic leadership and management, right? Using the principles of the Quran and Hadith. Any subject matter that you would say, or you can think about, there are Dars-e Kharij classes taught in the Hawza. Mostly in Qum, not so much in Najaf. Najaf has remained a bit traditional in terms of what they teach, mostly just usul and fiqh. But in Qum, in other related Hawzas, you can become a PhD or mujtahid in pretty much any subject. There are some who go and they get their PhD or become mujtahids in family counseling. That's it. That using the principles of the Quran and the Hadith from the Ahlul Bayt, they know how to advise. They know how to counsel families. They know how to deal with marital problems and things like that. There's a whole subject discipline dedicated to psychology, right? And there's different approaches there too. There's sometimes what's called spiritual psychology. All right, so again, I don't want to go into everything. So these are two different movements that we have right now. One group saying, look, Islam is about namaz, roz, hajj, hajj and all this other stuff. You do your stuff, it's, religious stuff. The stuff for the dunya, let's go to the experts. Let's those guys who, got PhDs and they mastered in that, who cares about their religion, let's take the truth from them. And then Islam, we'll make sure it doesn't go against Islamic rules, but, let's take from them. Others say, no. The Quran is tibyanun li kulli shay. Allah is saying everything's been mentioned in this book. The Ahlul Bayt didn't come and mention a few different things here and there. They didn't, Islam didn't just come tell you how to clean yourself in the bathroom, right? There's much more to that. In fact, some ulama use that as evidence. They're like, look, if Islam is even going to show you how to clean yourself in the bathroom, of course they're going to talk about everything else. Every single little detail is being mentioned. Even in terms of interest, right? Or, people call it riba. I don't like to use the word interest. These English translations don't work well. But even in terms of the Islamic banking system, Islamic financial system, there are specific exceptional categories mentioned in our fiqh books about who, because we know you're not allowed to charge interest on a Muslim, right? We know that. But there are some exceptions mentioned, which I'm scared to say right now because then you're all going to start using it. But for example, some ulama, some marajis say, a father, if he loans money to his son, disclaimer, please don't do this, but if a father lends money to his son, he can actually charge him interest. He can charge him riba. And there's a whole discussion on why that's allowed, right? There's a lot of these very strange sort of exceptions. And now, of course, you're like, well, why would that happen? Well, let's wait till, I don't know, a couple of months or a couple of years after that. Let's first get rid of the haram riba that we're involved in, then we can talk about the halal one, if that's okay. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So let me go back to this conversation, this discussion. Right now, among the ulama, there are two different approaches to Islam as a whole. And you see this among scholars too. One is that no, Islam has a very limited role in somebody's life. Yeah, it's got a lot of details, definitely, but it's a limited role. It doesn't get involved in every single little affair. And you see that among some scholars, they say, look, we'll give you the fiqh rulings, we'll give you tafsir, we'll give you hadith and things like that, but the rest of the stuff, you guys go and figure it out. We're not going to get involved, right? Islam's not going to come and tell you how to, build a, chemistry laboratory or how to run experiments. Like, Islam doesn't care about that. Islam is not going to tell you how to build a car. It doesn't tell you how to run a factory. Like, who cares? The other group says no. Every single thing, because all knowledge is stemming from Allah. There is no such thing as secular knowledge and Islamic knowledge. We hear this term a lot. See, everything is a reflection of Allah's names, isn't it? Everything is from Allah, isn't it? So everything is a way for us to connect back to Allah. When people talk about, this golden age of Islam and science, it got big and all that, and those ages, do you know why? It's because every single one of those philosophers, scientists, whatever word you want to use, they were masters in every single subject available. Why? Because everything was a reflection of Allah's names. That's why. Not because they said, okay, we know our fiqh, now, okay, God, you step aside for a second, we're going to do math separately. No. Everything was a reflection of Allah for them. That's why they have something called sacred geometry, sacred mathematics. They have this idea of Islamic geometry, Islamic engineering. Even there, I'll just give you a little taste of it. Even if you don't want, I'm going to force feed you, whatever, too bad. Right now, if you ask the average person, we want to design a building. Who would you get? You'd get an engineer, right? Engineer, architect, that's the people you would get, obviously. Right? You wouldn't get some Molana. Like, what does this Molana know, right? They're not going to know how to do that. Well, in the sort of sacred geometry, or there's certain metaphysical Irfani principles, they say, look, if a room is designed that's too small, then the soul becomes constricted, and people won't be able to function properly. If a room is too big, if the proportions are not off, or if they're too wide and too off, then people will not be able to focus, they won't be able to concentrate, and their soul will go floating everywhere. Like most of you who are on your phones right now, for example. So there's specific principles in Islamic geometry, in sacred geometry, that says this is exactly the golden ratio, if you want to use it that way. This is the exact proportions you need to make a building. And what kind of function is it going to be? Is it meant for the remembrance of Allah? Is it meant for Islamic education? If you're going to design an Islamic school. Which way should you design the building? It's like, okay, some people would come and say, all right, well, let's do the electrical stuff will be this way, plumbing's this way. They'll think in those terms, dunyawi terms, right? Like that's how we design it. But somebody else who has a background in what we call Islamic engineering or all this other stuff, they'll come and say, look, your teacher needs to be faced and the classroom needs to be designed in a way where the children are facing the qibla the whole time. That's the way that it happens. The way that you design your bathrooms should be in a way that if somebody has their faucet to the right of them, the qibla should be in front of them, so that the water's to the right and they can face the qibla as they're doing it. So are these principles things that are discussed modern day? No. And now, again, we have many people who say, this stuff is not the job of Islam. The reason they mention this stuff is because they don't know that this stuff exists with Islam. All right, let me give you an example, if you can send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sometimes you get invited to a dinner, somebody invites you over, or let me put it the other way. Let's say you invite people over for dinner. You invite them over, so, you slave all day. Well, you don't, you probably make your wives do it, but whatever, you know what I mean. Somebody slaves in the house, making all this wonderful food, right? You got all these appetizers, maybe salads. Well, you guys, I don't know if you do salads, but, all this deep fried appetizer stuff. You've got all these nice meals, right? The entrees, and you got some desserts, and you have to have chai. All these things are laid out there. Okay. Now, if, let's say, your guest comes, and let's say they bring one dish of their own, right? They bring their own salad or their own dessert. Like, oh, thank you, right? Like, okay, fine, that makes sense. What happens if they bring their own 5-course meal? They say, look, I brought an appetizer, I brought an entree, I brought dessert, and I brought some chai too. You might be like, what was the point of, I invited you so that we could do the work. Like, why are you bringing all this stuff? And then on top of that, let's say you still like, okay, fine, they wanted to, help us out. You give them the benefit of the doubt. So they bring everything. And let's say they don't even touch your food, they only touch the food that they ate. And sometimes, I think we're very guilty. We don't trust the people's house that we're going to. So, we go buy our own dessert, we come in, and, this is the problem. You buy like a nice cake or whatever. You come there in the hopes that they're going to open it up and serve it because you want the cake that you brought. You don't want what they're serving. You want the cake that you brought. But then they take it and they put it in their fridge. You're like, they're not going to bring it out, are they? They're going to save it. And anyway, I'm talking about some personal problems I have. Sorry. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. May Allah make it easy for all of us. So if that happened, if somebody's just bringing their own stuff and they don't even touch yours, you're like, what's the point? You might think, did this person not know that I am the host? I'm making all this stuff. Or maybe they didn't trust, or maybe they didn't know, like whatever it is. Maybe it's jahalat, maybe it's ignorance or arrogance, who knows? The same way that we have certain speakers or scholars who say, no, Islam has nothing to do with this. We've got to go to, tech giants, or let's ask people in Silicon Valley, whatever. Like, okay, you ask them if you don't know what Islam has to offer. If you don't know that Islam has its own economic system, that it has its own engineering system, that it has its own astronomical system, if you don't know that even in the Hawza, years ago, music theory was taught. There's such thing as Islamic music. And I know music comes up every single Slido, right? Every single week. But yeah, the ulama of the past knew, they would understand chords and keys and all this, and they would know what has a positive effect on the soul and what doesn't. So there's all these theories, and this was what was required of the basic Hawza syllabus. Now things have changed over time. I'm not going to get into that because it's going to trigger me a little bit, but the Hawza has changed a lot. So now, yeah, sometimes we do see certain speakers coming who don't have, let's say, dunyawi knowledge in that sense, fine, okay? And even in terms of the Islamic stuff, they have no idea too. Okay, that's fine. But it's dishonest if they say Islam has nothing to do with this whatsoever. What they should be saying is that, look, I don't know if Islam does, or it does, but I've never studied it myself, right? That should be the way to approach it. Because then what's going to happen on the other side is this. When you have the Ahlul Bayt, who are like our hosts, they're saying, look, we are opening up ilm to you. We're opening up knowledge of Allah to you. That's the whole point of the Ahlul Bayt. We're inviting you to this divine feast. Everything that we have is from Allah. Come and partake, right? We're teaching you about economics and engineering and geometry, all this stuff, right? But then somebody comes and says, no thanks, I've got my own, right? Let me go to John Locke. Let me see what he has to say. Let me see what Thomas Edison's doing or Tesla. Like, okay, man, you want to take, you want to bring one dish from them? That's fine. One little quote, that's okay. But if the majority of our worldview and our ideology is coming from people who believe that the world's a simulation, who don't even believe that they're existing in this world, if you know who I'm talking about, it's Elon Musk, obviously. He doesn't believe that this world is real. If you're taking your ideology from people like this, who have no grip on reality, then what is your Islam going to look like? The Ahlul Bayt spent years tirelessly, blood, sweat, and tears expressing everything that they could have. The ulama are writing books and books and books expressing to us what is Islam, what is this deen kul, what is Islamic and religious knowledge. And at the very least, we should see, what they have to say. It might not hurt us. It might be beneficial for us to learn the religion of Islam in its most expansive way. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. People, they always ask, Hasan, can you give me like a list of credible speakers and this and that? I don't like naming people. Right? I don't think it's appropriate. Ishara kafi, as they say, right? But there's points that at least you can use to just think and reflect. That's all, right? Just be a critical thinker. Like everybody says, be a critical thinker. I usually say don't, but whatever. Now I'll tell you to do it. Say, look, when somebody's speaking on behalf of the Ahlul Bayt, when they're speaking on behalf of Allah, of Islam, of the Quran and all this, what's being mentioned more often? Is it the Quran and Ahlul Bayt that's being mentioned? Or is the majority of what they're talking about their own self, their own ideas, their own lectures, their own books? Is it some other random, secular, non-religious, whatever person? Like, what are they actually talking about? Have they been able to offer the evidence from the Ahlul Bayt? And if they haven't, again, most people who haven't gone to the Hawza, they wouldn't know this. I'm not saying everybody in the Hawza is credible. Definitely not. That's not the case. Probably the vast majority are not, but that's a different discussion altogether. But there are some clues that the Ahlul Bayt themselves have given us, right? That somebody shouldn't be describing themselves so often. Like you look in the books of the ulama, you look in the history, even when their students come to them and they say, do you remember in your book when you said this? Or do you remember in your class when you said this or in your speech? They would never use first person pronouns. They would try their best to say, in our discussion last week, or in the book that was written, right? They would push themselves away from this. But nowadays we have people say, in my lecture, or in my series, or in, this and that. I'm not saying that they're bad people or they're going to hell. That's not the point. But that may be reflective of an inner spiritual disease, of nafsaniya, of ananiya, of somebody wanting to push everybody towards themselves rather than pointing them towards Allah and the Ahlul Bayt. The same reason we see in even, people who are involved in getting us to cry and mourn for the Ahlul Bayt too, right? These Nawha Khan and things like that. Some people get upset, right? Because they're like, oh, this is my stage. This is what I have to do. So they push everything on themselves. Everything's about, I'm the one who's going to make you cry for Abu Abdullah. No. Imam Hussein and the Ahlul Bayt, they set up Majalis, not you. If you're speaking haqq, you're speaking truth, if you're being emotional, it's because of Allah and the position of the Ahlul Bayt. It's not because of you and your nice voice, right? And all this. So we have to be very careful of the people that we invite and that we trust to impart religious knowledge upon us. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Inshallah, next session on Thursday, we'll now go to the end of this. So we said Mukhtar tried. He got a little bit of support. 2,000 people switched over. But the vast majority still stayed with the Tawabin. They still supported Sulaiman. And then Sulaiman makes his call. He said, finally, in the year, I think it was towards the end of that year, 684, up until around 685, that's when he says, now it's time for us to rise up and go out and fight. So inshallah, in our final few sessions before Arba'een, we'll start discussing what exactly did he say, what did he do, what happened. Did all the supporters show up? What happened there? Were there any other fitnas that were going on? Inshallah, we'll discuss that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We all have different connections to the Shuhada. Whenever we hear the name of the Shuhada, of the family of the Ahlul Bayt who were present in Karbala, on Ashura, and afterwards, there's a different emotional attachment that we have with them. When we hear, for example, Aun, or Muhammad, or Qasim, right? Our mind and our heart goes to one place. When we think about Abbas or Akbar, our mind goes somewhere else. Why? It's simple. It's because we know Aun, Muhammad, Qasim, they were young. And they're not trained warriors, right? They're not even baligh, according to most historians. They couldn't even get on the horses themselves. But Abbas, Akbar, right? Hur, all these other, men, they were trained. So our connection to them is different, right? There's certain things, we have certain expectations of what they were capable of performing on the battlefield. So our gham and the musayib that we recite is related to that. In the same way, when we talk about Imam Hussein and his musibah, say, yeah, well, he's an imam. Of course, it's sad, but he's an imam. We talk about Imam Sajjad's difficulty. Yeah, but he's an imam. When we think about Bibi Zainab, like, yes, she's not an imam. She has a different level of isma, but still, she's somebody who's been trained by Ali ibn Abi Talib. She's been trained by Fatima al-Zahra, so her maqam is different. When we think about Ali al-Asghar, the youngest shaheed, our mind goes somewhere else too. And yes, we weep so much when we hear the masa'ib of Ali al-Asghar. But a part of us rationalizes that he was a young baby. He didn't know what was going on, right? All he did is, use his motions to ask for water, and they quenched his thirst with an arrow. But when you take all of these factors and you look at somebody like Sakina, you say she was young, but old enough to understand what was going on in front of her. She was older than Asghar and older than many of the other kids that were there, but younger than many others as well. So she didn't understand the idea of war and fighting, but she was old enough to understand loss and pain. All of you who are fathers, whenever you take a trip and you leave your home for a little while and you're leaving your children behind, especially when you're leaving your young daughters behind, how difficult is that feeling? How difficult is that? Maybe it crosses your mind that maybe I'll never see my child again. This might be the last hug. This might be the last kiss. So maybe in some respect, Sakina and Hussein are happy that they're with one another when they leave Medina and Mecca and they're moving towards. But in these last few moments, when Hussein is with Sakina, in these final moments, when Hussein just wants to go out onto the battlefield, when Vuljana refuses to move, when Hussein is he's begging Vuljana, please, after this, you'll be able to get some water. I know you're tired, but I am tired too. Just take me out to the battlefield. It's Sakina that's holding Vuljana back. It's Sakina with her final two wishes, saying, Baba, before you go, please, two hajat, two requests that I have from you. Hussein comes down, says, Beti, what do you want? Tell me what you want. He says, first, Baba, you know that I can only sleep on your chest. And I know that I don't want to bother my auntie Zainab, so please just let me take one nap on your chest before I go. So Sakina sleeps on the chest of Hussein one more time, and they rest together. And then the second, and this one is the heartbreaking one, is when he says, okay, Bunayya, what is your final request? What do you want from me? He says, Baba, I don't like being over here. Baba, I don't like all this bloodshed. I don't like these swords. I don't like these enemies. I don't like this place. Please, can you send me back to Medina? Can you send me back to Najaf? Can you send me back somewhere else? I don't want to be here anymore. And Hussein, with every fiber in his being, has to control himself because he needs to tell Sakina, but he cannot tell her that, Sakina, beti, you will never see Medina ever again. You'll never see your home ever again. You will pass and die with my head in your hands, in your godi, and you will die there in the prisons of Sham. This is how you'll pass. And every single step of the way, this is how Sakina has to deal with this grief. Seeing the head of Hussein in all these different situations. When she goes on Sham Ghariba and she goes to the body, and Zainab comes and sees her laying down at the feet of Hussein. Zainab says, Ya Sakinatul Hussein, Amanatul Hussein, what are you doing by the feet of this headless body? What are you doing over here? And she says, I wanted to go to sleep with my Baba. She's like, okay, I know, but how did you know that this is your Baba? How did you know there's no head on this body? How did you recognize him? He says, what? I was scared when all the tents were burning, so I ran out into the middle of the desert and I was calling out, Baba, Abata, Abata, Wainak, where are you? He says, and I heard a call from this body saying, Elayya, Elayya, Bunayya, Aja, beti. And I came to this body, says, okay, Sakina, I understand. Zainab says to her, Sakina, I understand, but you normally want to sleep on your father's chest. Why are you sleeping by his feet? And Sakina says, I tried to sleep on his chest, but his chest was completely destroyed. I tried to rest on his chest, but his bones were completely broken. I couldn't find any sukoon. There is no sukoon for Sakina on Sham Ghariba. I tried. I couldn't find a comfortable position because his chest was completely now inward and it was melted into the ground. So I had no choice but to sleep by his feet. This is the ghurba. This is the musibah of Sakina bint al-Hussein. Finally, when they make their way to Sham, when they're going through the Bazar-e-Sham, when somebody comes and sees this young girl, he comes and says, who are you? She says, Ana Sakina bint al-Hussein. I am Sakina, the daughter of Hussein. He says, is there anything that I can do for you? I knew your grandfather. I knew Rasulullah. Tell me, is there some favor that I can do for you? He says, yes. Do you see all of these heads that are over here? This one of Abbas, my uncle. This one of Asghar, my brother. Do you see this one of Akbar? Do you see this one of my father, Hussein? All of these heads are around us right now. And do you see us nangasar behijab? Do you see that all these people in Sham are staring at us? We've never been stared at like this before. Can you go and make sure that these heads go ahead of us? And maybe people will stop looking at us and they'll start looking at the heads instead. Can you imagine that Sakina has to tell somebody to keep the head of her father away from her? Finally, they say one of the nights in Sham, when she's in the prison, she goes to sleep. They say there's two dreams that she had when she was in the prisons of Sham. One dream, she saw a lady that was sitting on top of a camel, and one of those things that you ride on a camel. And when she's wondering who is this beautiful lady that's sitting inside this camel, she asks somebody else that's here. She sees this lady putting her head on top of her head. She asks somebody else, who is this wonderful lady? She says, don't you recognize your grandmother, Fatima Zahra? So she wants to complain. She says, wa ammata. Do you know what they did to my father Hussein? Did you see what they did to him? And when she starts to explain all the different things, he says they had swords on him. They didn't give him water. Then Bibi Zahra says, Sakina, Sakina, stop. Don't speak anymore. I was watching everything. You don't know I saw everything. And she showed a shirt, a bloodied shirt. Is hada qamisu ibn Hussein. This is the qamis of Hussein. This will be with me until Yawm al-Qiyamah. They say the next day, the next night, she had another dream. And finally in this dream, she sees her father Hussein. She says, Baba, Abata, where have you been? Baba, why did you make me a team? Baba, we've been going from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham. Nobody's there to protect us. Abbas was there before. There's nobody. Akbar was here before, but he's not here. There's no men to protect us. There's nobody here to support us. There are no men with us. Baba, nobody's here to protect our hijab. Baba, why have you left us like this? Baba, I wish I had become shaheed before you. Baba, she's complaining and complaining. She's like, Baba, let me see you one more time. And she woke up crying and crying and crying. Ajrukum ala Allah. And when Yazid woke up and heard this, he couldn't sleep. He said, who is this crying? He says, this is the daughter of Hussein. He's like, what does she want? She wants to see her father again. He said, fine, send the head to Sakina. They come out with a tray. There's a cloth covering this head on the tray. When they present it to Sakina, she asks, what is this? He says, remove the cloth and you'll finally get to see your father. So she removes the She removed the cloth and sees her father. And some narrators say she started crying out. Says, Wa abata, wa abata. He begins crying. She grabs the head and begins kissing it over and over again. She puts her cheek to the cheek of Hussein. She begins passing out. She finally gets rest now. When they wake up and they see Sakina hugging the head of Hussein, they try to wake her up. And then Imam Sajjad says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridan biqadaihi wa tasliman li amri. Wa sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibun. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridan biqadaihi wa tasliman li amri. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Ya Hussein.
Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina, Hai Sakina. अब सकीना को मेरी ना सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी ना सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी ना सताए कोई, अब सकीना ना सताए कोई। बाप का सर सरे नज़ा पे दिखाए कोई, बाप का सर सरे नज़ा पे दिखाए कोई, सब सकीना को मेरी ना सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी ना सताए कोई। हाय मासूमा के कानों से लहू बहता है, दामने पाक से आग से क्यों जलता है, बाप का साया नहीं लौट कर आया नहीं, जुल्म से सहमी हुई खाक पर सोई हुई, इसको अब्बास के बाजू न दिखाए कोई, इसको अब्बास के बाजू न दिखाए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई। हाय सज्जाद के पैरों से क्यों लहू बहता है, हर कदम पर मेरे बीमार को गम मिलता है, क्या खता है इसकी बोलिए बिनते अली, ये जफा हम पे हुई के ज़ैनब रोई, मेरे बीमार को कैदी न बनाए कोई, मेरे बीमार को कैदी न बनाए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई। मैं कभी आई थी शहजादी कूफा बनकर, आज आई हूँ रसन पस्ता में कैदी बनकर, न तमाशाई बनो राह से मेरी हटो, ए कूफियो याद रखो हमें सादा सुनो, मेरी मासूमा को सदका न खिलाए कोई, मेरी मासूमा को सदका न खिलाए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई। फूल सा चेहरा भला कैसे तमाचे सहले, गोद की पाली भला खाक पर कैसे सोए, रो रही है ये ज़मीं आसमां अर्श बनी, आसरा कोई नहीं मर न जाए ये कहीं, आग दामन में लगी उसको बुझाए कोई, आग दामन में लगी उसको बुझाए कोई। अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई। शिमर के खौफ से वो प्यास को भूली बच्ची, हाय शब्बीर की प्यारी थी छोटी बच्ची। हाय मखतल को चली खाक पर ढूंढती रही, ढूंढी थी फिरती रही सीना ए इब्ने अली। बाप को सीने के बच्ची से छुपाए कोई, बाप को सीने से बच्ची से छुपाए कोई। अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई। कैसे शाहिद हो बयां पास में गर ज़ाहरा हो, मुस्तफा दे कयामत न कहीं पर पाहो। छिन गई है गौहर नारिदा है सर पर, शिमर से दर दर कर न सोना पाई अक्सर। ये यतीमा है खुदा रा न रुलाए कोई, ये यतीमा न खुदा न रुलाए कोई। अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई, अब सकीना को मेरी न सताए कोई।
शाम के जिंदान में, 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 शाम के जिंदान में। याद जब बाबा की आई, याद जब बाबा की आई, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में। हाय बाबा, हाय बाबा के बच्ची सो गई। हाय बाबा, हाय बाबा के बच्ची सो गई। ना सदारों ने की आई, ना सदारों ने की आई, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में। याद जब बाबा की आई, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में। पूछा सुगरा ने सकीना को तो ज़ैनब ने कहा, पूछा सुगरा ने सकीना को तो ज़ैनब ने कहा। मैं सकीना छोड़ आई, मैं सकीना छोड़ आई, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में। बाप का सर पाके ऐसी छुप हुई के फिर कभी, बाप का सर पाके ऐसी छुप हुई के फिर कभी, ना सदारों ने खियाई, ना सदारों ने खियाई, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में। बाप का सीने पे सर रख के जिसे आती है नींद, बाप का सीने पे सर रख के जिसे आती है नींद, जाने कैसे नींद आई, जाने कैसे नींद आई, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में, शाम के जिंदान में। आए मर के भी सकीना को रिहाई ना मिली, आए मर के भी सकीना को रिहाई ना मिली, बाई ने तुरबत बनाई, बाई ने तुरबत बनाई, शाम के जिंदान में, 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 शाम के जिंदान। सूरत मुबारक फातिहा।
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अल्लाहुम्मा कुल्ल वलियका अल-हुज्जत इब्निल सलवातुका अलैहि व अला आबाए फ़ी हाज़िहि स्साअति व फ़ी कुल्लि साअ वलियान व हाफ़िज़ा व क़ाइदान व नासिरा व दलीलान व ऐना हत्ता तुस्किनहु अर्ज़का तौआ फ़ीहा तवीला बिरहमतिका या अस्सलामु अलैका या रसूल अल्लाह, अस्सलामु अलैका या अमीर अल-मुअमिनीन, अस्सलामु अलैकी या फ़ातिमत अज़-ज़हरा सय्यदती निसाइल आलमीन, अस्सलामु अलैकी या खदीजत अल-कुबरा, अस्सलामु अलैका या हसन अल-मुज्तबा, अस्सलामु अलैका या अबा अब्दिल्लाहिल हुसैन व अला तिस्अतिल मासूमीन मिन ज़ुर्रियतिक अली इब्न अल-हुसैन व मुहम्मद इब्न अली व जाफ़र इब्न मुहम्मद व मूसा इब्न जाफ़र व अली इब्न मूसा व मुहम्मद इब्न अली व अली इब्न मुहम्मद वल हसन इब्न अली वल हुज्जत इब्न अल-हसन अज्जलल्लाहु फ़रजह व सहलल्लाहु मख़रजह व ज़ुहूरह। अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुह।